Thor, Love and Thunder, written and directed by this man. Featuring only the finest Marvel state-of-the-art CGI. Now let's just dwell on this shot for a while, shall we? In fact, I'd like to draw your attention to the windows in the back. Notice there is no separation between the glass and the mountains in the distance. Stereo-wise, the majestic vista out there might as well be paintings hanging on the wall. Now, to be fair, other shots in this same scene do separate out the view from the windows, but the 3D motto for this movie seems to be to do less wherever possible. As a consequence, there are numerous shots in this movie that end up with 3D comparable to the first Thor movie from 2011. Back then, it was limitations of technology that defined the style. Today, it's a choice to limit the effect, to concentrate any stereo detail to just really the foreground and let the background act as sort of a curtain. Now, there are many examples here of the background being stretched and warped into position rather than any genuine separation of the elements. And perhaps the most heartbreaking example of this is found in this landscape of twisted colored glass shards. This could have been spectacular in 3D, but there is zero stereo detail in any of it. And notice how the goats are just screaming out to see it in stereo. At best, it's only marginally processed to keep it from looking like a painted wall. And so the goats scream on and on. And some say on a calm night, if you press your ear up to your TV, you can still hear them screaming. It never ends. Elsewhere in the movie, we encounter more of the same. This establishing shot shows an entirely flat town, and even when we are close up, there's, again, little or no stereo detail in the buildings. None of these streets you see here, for example, feel like they actually run into the distance. It feels like an old-fashioned rear projection shot. It can go by unnoticed as long as you are solely focused on the characters up front. But I think even the most casual viewer will notice the cumulative effect of shot after shot after shot of shallow backgrounds. Now, it's not all bad. Sometimes the foreground elements push out to an enjoyable level, though I wouldn't say there's really a wow moment in here. I like this bubble display case. It is kind of neat how they managed to convert something like this. There's a moment where the movie switches to black and white, and in 3D, it is absolutely gorgeous. Something about the super high contrast and the crisp, clear shades of black just naturally want to jump off the page. If there's one reason to see the 3D version of Love and Thunder, it's for the time spent in black and white world. The backgrounds are still, shall we say, ignored, but it's often a simple landscape of stars that feel natural, pushed back uniformly. There's still some, as Bunker would say, missed opportunities, such as the debris in this shot is left completely flat. And from this other angle, we get a layer of rocks that is sort of warped left and right to get a quickie illusion of depth. It's okay in the sense that it's unoffensive. I mean, really, we're looking at the lightning in this shot. It draws no attention to itself. And again, that really sums up the 3D here. Nothing looks broken. It's just very rote. I imagine it all being processed by a team having no fun. They just want it done. Comparing the changes to the 2D version, we see some evidence that the 3D version is based on an earlier draft of the movie. I first noticed this sort of thing when looking at Far From Home, and at the time I openly wondered why the 3D version would be different. And I've since learned that Marvel rushes these out so fast that they send the 3D conversion team a version of the movie before it's done. In fact, they keep working on the 2D movie right up until its release. And this guarantees that the 3D edition will always be a lesser version, and also reveals that the 3D conversion team is given as little time as possible to create their changes. I mean, it is impressive that they can create 2 hours of 3D conversion in a matter of weeks, but, well, I don't know. Would the 3D be more interesting if it was done with more time? Or was this produced to the direction of the purchase order? Could Disney had gotten better and more interesting results if someone had the time to go through the shots and just direct for it? Or is it a mixture of both? Perhaps the more direction you give the team, the more complicated and expensive their estimate gets. So if that's a scenario, then I could imagine they just go over some broad details on a lunchtime Zoom call and leave it at that. Now, this person they call Thor is not the person from the earlier movies. Now, to the film's credit, they seem to understand this, and they do take a moment to explain why he has changed, though I just didn't buy it. Story-wise, I had trouble understanding where this was all coming from, and of all the directions you could go with Thor, why choose this one? Now, watching the director Taika Waititi's prior movie, which was Jojo Rabbit, it dawned on me that these two movies have things in common. The dynamic between Jane and Thor is similar to the relationship between Jojo and his mother. That is, it's distance, dutiful but without love, although the kid is desperate for any sign of it. Without any natural source of love, the kid becomes nurtured by his own imagination, and as described in the book Malignant Self-Love, which I'm sure everyone has a copy of, a narcissist eventually becomes stuck in a world where the imagination replaces the parent. And living up to that imagination becomes a replacement for love. Where I'm going with this is I believe Love and Thunder is not a sequel to Ragnarok, but is a sequel to Jojo Rabbit. Thor is Jojo all grown up, still captive to his own imagination, entirely oblivious to anyone else, and yet highly perceptive because he is continuously seeking any affirmation, whether they want to give it to him or not. In the opening act of the movie, we see a typical chapter in the life of this version of Thor. He stands where everyone can see him. There's loud, ego-boosting arena rock music that seemingly only he can hear. The Guardians have learned to be very careful with how they treat him, and they eventually dump him. Notice in particular how, when the moment comes, he talks over them to make it sound like it's his idea. He has to remain in control of the situation. He never really talks to anyone. He just sort of makes proclamations, which is consistent with the book. He never talks. He lectures. He never moves. He poses. Thor is not looking for love, you see, but he is looking for the love of a part of his brain he loves that requires constant evidence of importance. What this movie only lightly touches on is in real life this type of person would aggressively sulk for days or fly into a rage if you tried to tell them anything that contradicted their imagination. If you disrespect that imagined self, well, you're insulting their mother and father. That doesn't do. The rest of the movie is the same scenario as this first act, but from an internal perspective. Allegorical, kind of like the movie Inside Out. Jane represents any number of people in his life, but likely a girlfriend. The hammer is her life that is going along just fine without Thor. For anyone else, this would be fine, even an ideal circumstance. But to his condition, it threatens his inner self, which is represented by the children. Notice as soon as Jane is introduced as having no particular need of Thor, the children become immediately in danger. The children are Thor's vulnerability, for which his parental ego was created to protect from abandonment, but only feels fulfilled if it's getting attention. Jane, as an independent, is not serving this purpose. Therefore, to him, the world as he sees it is dying. Thor is the cancer. Thor sees Jane as rotting away because she doesn't gratify him anymore. Thor is also the god killer. The god killer fight is something of a ruse, intended to exhaust and eventually expel the unneeded partners. He sees Jane as having already abandoned him and anticipates a future actual abandonment, like the Guardians did. It's something that reoccurs in his life, but before it happens, he is going to reframe or redefine the situation into one where he is in control. He has to control the cause without actually being the cause. So the god killer attacks anything important or sacred. In the real world, this might look like setting impossible rules or standards and finding ways to communicate this in degrading or ways that make her look stupid. It's very easy for him to do this emotionally because really there is nothing more important or sacred than himself. So this kind of abuse is also a kind of divine justice, and all the while pretending to be on Jane's side. It's no accident that the end requires Jane to give up the very thing that's holding her together. Both Jojo Rabbit and Love and Thunder end with what you might describe as an adoption. The former relationship is gone, and he finds a new one. With Jojo, we see a little dance that, to an outsider, may seem wildly tone-deaf to the moment, but what it implies is Jojo believes that this new person is going to give him the attention he deserves. At the end of Thunder, Thor is now paired with someone that he gets to be the powerful center of attention again. If there was any genuine love for Jane, the world would have gone black after she died, but the world is black while she is still alive and blooms to life again with color after she is finally gone, like a phoenix rising. All for the love of thunder. Fun movie.